So far, you would have covered 7 plagues, because we're about to do the 8th and 9th plague. And each of these plagues, Father Tadrasmalati comments and says, God does away with some belief that the Egyptians had. So I'll give you a very good example. The second plague of the frogs, where you have a large amount of frogs come out of nowhere and start destroying everything. For the Egyptians, frogs were associated with the god Osiris. Yeah? And frogs were associated with like the plentiful water that came from the Nile, from the idea that the Nile feeding all of Egypt. So frogs were seen as a blessing, were seen as something good. So God does it, flips on its head. It's like, yeah, you think these frogs are good for you, Yanni? I'll give you so many frogs, you're sick of them. Like almost to say in their face, look at this god Osiris of yours. I can do more than he can do. And on top of that, I'll show you how useless he is. Yeah? So in every single one of these plagues, he does away with something Egyptians hold dear to. Almost to say to them, these things, not almost to say to them, these things you hold so dear to your heart, these things you hold so dear, you think are correct, are meaningless. Not to make them despair, not to make them upset, not to make them depressed, but to try and point them to who he is. And we'll get into that. I'm not going to try and spoil that now, but to point to him, rather than pointing to these things they hold so dear to them. Yeah? Okay, so I think we'll just jump in and start reading. Can we please read? Are you going to pass the mic around, Anthony? Yeah, so whoever has the mic. Can we please read from verse 1 to verse 3?
Now the Lord said to Moses, "Go in to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and hearts of his servants, that I may show these signs of mine before him, and that you may tell in the hearing of your son and your son's son the mighty things I have done in Egypt, and my signs which I have done among them, that you may know that I am the Lord." So Moses and Aaron came into Pharaoh and said to him, "Thus says the Lord God of the Hebrews, how long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go, that they may serve me."
Okay, awesome. So this sort of interaction is repeated, as you probably noticed, in every single plague. But just a few points to take out of it. So you've probably heard this, some speaker probably already said this, I don't know if they did, but I'll repeat it anyway. When it says here that God hardens Pharaoh's heart, what does it mean? Anyone? What does it mean? So Pharaoh or God? Okay, awesome, right? So when it's saying God hardened Pharaoh's heart, we sometimes think of it as God said that I don't want you to get better, just stuff you. You keep doing what you're doing, and every time I try and fix you, I'm going to make you do something bad instead. No, like, it doesn't make any sense. Like if God is doing all this to try and fix Pharaoh, to try and flip him, why would God then make him stop? Like it doesn't make sense. So what it's trying to get here is this idea we sometimes talk about where God doesn't necessarily cause the evil, doesn't cause evil things to happen in your life. More, he allows them to happen, right? So Pharaoh out of his own free will, every single point in these plagues, every time a plague happens, he chooses to say no, even though he comes to him first. Like Moses comes to him almost to ask permission of Pharaoh, which sounds strange, but almost to say, like, okay, Pharaoh, this is going to happen. What do you think? Like this, that's that kind of idea. It's like, this is going to happen. We're about to tell you what's going to happen. If you don't let the people go, let them go. What happened? And every single time, Pharaoh's like, no, it's happening. Like it's Pharaoh's choice that this happens. It's not like God doesn't give him the chance to change his mind. But he doubles down every single time. Like not even double down, like double 10. Like he keeps going down and down and down. He doesn't give up. Like he wants his opinion to hold no matter what. And he's extremely stubborn about it. Yep. So that's the part about what we mean when we say he hardened the heart of Pharaoh. And another thing to notice in verse 2, it says, my translation is a tiny bit different, and that you may tell in the hearing of your son and your son's son the mighty things I have done in Egypt, and my signs which I have done among them, that you may know that I am the Lord. So it seems here God is speaking to the Israelites saying, yeah, the Egyptians are going to be stuffed over for your sake, so you may see my mighty works. But what does it say there? It doesn't say, you Israelites will see the goodness of God, so you may know my mighty works. God does it for the sake of the Egyptians as well. Yeah? Sometimes we make it into as Egyptians versus Israelites, but in God's mind, there's no such thing as one person against another. In his mind, he wants all to come to him. Yeah, he wants every single person to come to him. So these mighty works, although we sometimes think of them as a punishment to the Egyptians, it is also to make the Egyptians see him. Right, so you know how in the intro we're speaking about this idea where every single plague flipped something Egyptians believed and tried to undo something they believed? Undo them why? Not to just make them in the end empty and have nothing, right? Undo these ideas so that when they are empty, God can finally come to them and say, be filled with me. Yeah? It's this idea not to empty khalas, just so they're depressed. No. Empty to refill, empty to rebuild. Yeah? And this is something I'll point again to in the first plague, but when we get to it, Yanni. And one thing as well, and it's almost like a warning to every one of us. Yeah? It's in verse 3. And so when Moses and Aaron go to Pharaoh and they say to him, thus says the Lord God of the Hebrews, how long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go so they may serve me. So Pharaoh's biggest fault, and God is pointing to it and saying it here, you're refusing to humble yourself. You're refusing to allow that my will, with God saying this, you're refusing to allow my will to override your will, right? You're so set on what you think to be right that no matter what God is showing him, like he does, as we see here, there's 10 plagues, yeah? It wasn't until the 10th plague where his son had to die before he finally woke up, yeah? He was so stubborn. And sometimes we point at Pharaoh and say, look how stubborn this guy was. But we do exactly the same thing. Like, I'm not going to give personal stories, but in my life, I've definitely seen experiences where I'm set on this thing. I think, this job has to be right, or this career has to be right, this whatever has to be, this relationship has to be right. Yeah, and you go in, and then God closes every single thing in your way, and like, no, my way has to be right. What is this, bro? You didn't do what I wanted. No, right? Because after you look at it for the you come to the end and you look and you're like, God knew best. Like I was dumb. God knew best. Yeah. So sometimes we do the same thing even though we do not realize it. Okay. Can we read verses 4 to 7?
Or else, if you refuse to let my people go, behold, tomorrow I will bring locusts into your territory, and they shall cover the face of the earth, so that no one will be able to see the earth. And they shall eat the residue of what is left, which remains from you from the hail, and they shall eat every tree which grows up for you out of the field. They shall fill your houses, the houses of all servants, and the houses of all the Egyptians, which neither your fathers nor your fathers' fathers have seen, since the day that they were on the earth to this day. And he turned and went out from Pharaoh.
Verse 7 as well.
Then Pharaoh's servants said to him, how long shall this man be a snare to us? Let the men go, that they may serve the Lord their God. Do you not yet know Do you not yet know that Egypt is destroyed?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. So one thing to notice with this plague, we have these locusts here. You have these locusts, they come in and they destroy all the crops and the plants. Fairly straightforward. But one thing this made me start thinking about is, okay, if I'm going to try and make this more relatable to myself, like to my own life or to our own lives, what does this mean? Sometimes, inadvertently, we might plant things in our heart, plant things in our mind, plant things in just day-to-day lives that we just leave not realizing how bad they damage us. Yeah? So we can say these locusts come to us. These locusts come, these things in our life come to uproot these things we've just sort of left there and not realized how damaging they are to us. Yeah? God allows us to make the choice to plant things in ourselves. He allows us to make this choice. But sometimes, every once in a while, when something bad comes around, we realize the things we planted were not good for us. We realize that, okay, I relied on this. I relied on my money, for example, and then money trouble comes through, and you're like, okay, God, where were you? Or I learned to rely on I don't know, my friend, or relied on a person, relied on an individual, and the second, say they go to another church and they move somewhere else, you're just, now what do I have now? I lost my friend. It's because we've placed our trust in something we shouldn't have. Yeah? We place our trust in something we shouldn't have. At the end of the day, no matter how good our friends are, I'll just say it rawly, like I love my friends, I love all my friends. In the end of the day, there is only one person who knows who I am, who knows how bad I am, who knows who I am, and accepts me as I am, and that is God. Yeah? All these other things in my life are secondary. All these other things are secondary. Not to say that, you don't enjoy these things, no. But to realize when I have these things in my life, they come from God. They don't come from, I did well, and I was so successful, and this was all my hard work, and I got this. Yeah? Because in the end, where did you get your ability? Where did you get everything you have? It came from God. He was your origin. So sometimes, so instead of these bad things happening and me saying, where were you, God? Take these things and say, how can I get to God? Right? Because sometimes we forget that God doesn't want me when I'm at my highest. Because if I think I'm great, there's no need for God in my head. And God sort of doesn't like the person who's proud and just assumes, I'm already good, I don't need you. He loves the person who is the lowest of the low. Like when he was on earth, who did he go to? He didn't go to the Pharisees, who even though were good, by the way, sometimes we make the Pharisees into really bad people. They were amazing. Like these were people who wanted to live the sacraments, not the sacraments at the time, to live the 10 Commandments. They wanted to live with God. But they missed the point entirely. Why? Because they thought they were so good. Yeah? Christ went to the tax collectors and the sinners, the people who were so bad that the laws of Israelites, and the laws would say this, by the way, God will not disagree with them. They should not associate with these people. Yeah? Like, that's who God went to. And if God goes to the lowest of the low, then when I'm at my lowest, I have the best opportunity to turn to God. Yeah? We sometimes put it on our head, we flip it completely. We say, I have to be perfect to go to church, I have to be perfect to go to heaven, I have to be perfect to go to God. God is going to sound very controversial. That's not important. Like, I don't need to be perfect to make it to heaven. What do I need to do? I need to have a relationship with God. I need to have God in my life. Because in the end of the day, how am I determined if I go to heaven or not? Did I choose God or did I not choose God? Did I struggle to follow God or did I just give up on the way? Yeah? So in my lowest, that is when I have the best opportunity, because that's when I realize how bad I am. That's when I realize I have nothing, so that I can turn to Him. Because only when I'm empty, when the crops are taken out, when I have no food left, when I have no plantation left, that I can turn, was that me? Sorry. That I can turn to God and realize I have nothing, that I only have Him. I'll give you a story about St. Anthony. He's my favorite saint. I have his name. Thank God I have his name. He's an amazing, amazing saint. One thing that happened in his life that sometimes it might not click, is that when he was very young, not very young, like when he was a teenager, 16-ish, 15-ish, he lost both of his parents. We don't know the exact stories or details surrounding it, but he lost both of his parents. And not long after that is when he decided, or not decided, but when he got his calling to become a monk. When he got his calling to go out to the desert and live as a hermit. It was at his lowest, when he had no one left pretty much. The only person left in his life was his sister. That this thing came about, this desire came about. Why? Because St. Anthony, from when he was young, knew what was important in his life. He knew who was important in his life. That even when all these other things went, he had God. Another just an interesting fact on the side, his favorite psalm, I think St. Athanasius writes, it was Psalm 27. And it begins, the Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life, of whom shall I be afraid? And there's a line where it says, when my mother and my father leave me. It's like, wow. Like this guy, like he felt it was real to him. Like he lost both of his parents. So what did he do? He would turn to a psalm where it says, when my father and my mother leave me. Like to turn to God and say, you are my only respite. Yeah, you are the only consolation I have in my life. So it's in your lows, it is when I'm lowest that I should be turning to God. Another thing I heard very recently, which was crazy to me, and I don't think I've fully gotten, like it's sunk in yet. It's something I heard by Father Anthony Paul. I searched him up, Upper Remedy, he's amazing. And he was in a talk talking about the idea of turning to God and living in God. And he says something which sounds extremely controversial. But he said, even if a person had just committed adultery, right? So saying a person committed adultery, is in the bed they just committed adultery in. He says, if you turn to God in that moment and say, Lord, forgive me, I am a sinner, he says, God will not reject you. He says, in that moment, even doing that, like we would think that's crazy, like what's wrong with it? Like one, doesn't make any sense. He's saying, that is the perfect time to turn back. There's a perfect time to turn around, which is, it's amazing. It's crazy to think about. Okay, awesome. Can we read verses 8 to 11, please? Actually, sorry, just read 8 to 15. Sorry, it's a lot longer now.
So Moses and Aaron were brought again to Pharaoh, and he said to them, "Go serve the Lord your God, who are the ones that are going." And Moses said, "We will go with our young and our old, with our sons and our daughters, with our flocks and our herds we will go, for we must hold a feast to the Lord." Then he said to them, "The Lord had better be with you when I let you and your little ones go. Beware, for evil is ahead of you. Not so. Go now, you who are men, and serve the Lord, for that is what you desired." And they were driven out from Pharaoh's presence. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the land of Egypt for the locusts, that they may come upon the land of Egypt and eat every herb of the land, all that the hail has left." So Moses stretched out his rod over the land of Egypt, and the Lord brought an east wind on the land all that day and all that night. When it was morning, the east wind brought the locusts, and the locusts went up over all the land of Egypt and rested on all the territory of Egypt. They were very severe. Previously there had been no such locusts as they, nor shall there be such after them. For they covered the face of the whole earth, so that the land was darkened, and they ate every herb of the land and all the fruit of the trees which the hail had left. So there remained nothing green on the trees, nor on the plants of the field throughout all the land of Egypt.
Okay, awesome. So we had Moses and Aaron have warned Pharaoh, and Pharaoh is sort of trying to argue with them because they're trying to say, okay, let's take everyone out, allow everyone to go out and serve the Lord where he's told us to go. And Pharaoh is trying to argue with it, like, I don't know how he's not learned his lesson by now, like the rest of us, how we don't learn our lesson, but he goes to him and he tells him, okay, this is going to happen, just let us go. He's like, no, only your men can go. And then God's like, khalas, just give him the locusts, hopefully we'll learn from it. So Moses goes out, stretches his hand, the locusts come, and they do the things we were talking about before. Okay, can we read? Sorry, that was a quick bit, sorry. Read from 16 to 20, please.
Then Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron in haste and said, "I have sinned against the Lord your God and against you. Now therefore please forgive my sin only this once, and entreat the Lord your God, that he may take away from me this death only." So he went out from Pharaoh and entreated the Lord. And the Lord turned a very strong west wind, which took the locusts away and blew them into the Red Sea. There remained not one locust in all the territory of Egypt. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the children of Israel go.
Okay, awesome. So, again, as happened every single plague, Pharaoh sees the plague, sees the impact it has, and says to Moses and Aaron, "I have sinned against the Lord your God and against you." And one thing I was thinking about when I read this is God at this point knows he's going to say la. Like he's just going to in the end he's just going to be like, "Nah, I'm not, jokes, lol. I didn't mean what I said before." He's about to do that every single time. And God still accepts when he says, even this he's just saying it, to be honest, at this point. He's just saying it for the sake of saying it. And God's accepting it. Like Moses goes out once Pharaoh says it and actually stops it. And it says there's not a single locust left in all of Egypt. Not a single one. It's crazy. To me, that does not make any sense. But one thing I sort of got out of it, one thing I reflected on is that even when sometimes we don't mean to repent, right? Sometimes when we don't fully realize what we have done and don't fully appreciate that we have sinned before God, our little words, Keda, saying, "Lord, forgive me, I am a sinner," is accepted. Yeah? You have the tax collector goes into the temple and says, "Lord, forgive me, for I am a sinner." He's just looking down, that's all he says, and walks out. That's accepted. Something so simple and something to us looks so silly, looks so meaningless. God accepts. Because sometimes our issue is we make things big. Like to be able to say, to turn back to God, I make it very hard in my head. I say I have to do this step, I have to stop doing this sin for like 2 months, and then maybe once I stop for 2 months, maybe I can go back to church. Right? Wrong. Like God, in the small that we do, is happy. In the small that we do, he's very happy. I'll give you a story. I can't remember exact details, but I know it had something to do with Saint Silouan, who was a Russian Orthodox monk. And it was telling a story about a brother who had come to the monastery that had a very bad reputation among the monks. Like, he'd passed away, and all the monks started bagging this guy out after he passed away. He's like, this guy's gonna make it to heaven, like, khalas. He wasn't even a monk, he wasn't worthy of the name, which is like, whoa. Anyway, and then they see a vision. All these monks who were bagging him out see a vision. And in the vision, they see this monk dressed in white going up to heaven. And they wake up, or they get out of the vision, and they're like, that made zero sense. Like, what just happened? How's this guy in heaven? So they go up, I think, to Saint Silouan, and they ask him, you know this monk, he used to drink every day. He used to get drunk. Like, how's he in heaven? And that was his issue, by the way. That was the problem. He used to drink. It's like, how's he in heaven? And Saint Silouan says to them, do you know the story of this monk? Do you know what he was like before? And they're like, no, we don't know anything about him. It's like, Taib, let me tell you the story. When he first came to the monastery, he was a drunk. Like, he would drink like 15 glasses of vodka or whatever. Like, he'd go hard. Like, he wouldn't chill. Like, he would go hard. Yeah, so when he first started, he was crazy. 10 years later, those 15 glasses dropped to 10. Another 10 years goes by. Those 10 dropped to 5. And by the time he'd come, just before he passed away, he was drinking only 2 a day. And Saint Silouan turns to him and says, what do you think God rewarded there? Was it the fact that he stopped completely? Because no, he never stopped, but he struggled. Yeah? There's little steps, like imagine you only dropped 5 glasses in 10 years. Like, that's like, you think that's nothing. That's like silly, like, no, I'm doing nothing by doing that. But God accepted that. So if I'm sincerely trying to stop something in my life, stop a sin in my life, and if I'm taking even the smallest steps, and year by year I'm only seeing very small progression, if I'm doing that sincerely, God accepts it. Yeah? Let's not make it too big, because God knows our sin. He knows us inside out, whether we like it or not. He knows every single little thing about us. So we can't hide anything from him. It's not like at any moment I'm perfect. I'll never be perfect. So even when I go to communion, I'm thinking, I stopped this sin for 2 months, I'm still not perfect. Right? So it doesn't matter, which sounds crazy. But it doesn't matter as long as I'm trying to search for him. I'm trying to follow him. Yeah? Even if I'm struggling, even if I find I can't stop this sin, my struggle is rewarded. So that's the part I got from Pharaoh. Okay. And again, we have Pharaoh's heart is hardened because he chooses of his own free will to say, no, I won't let the people go. Okay, can we please read? From verse 21 to let's say 26.
Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand toward heaven, that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, darkness which may even be felt. So Moses stretched out his hand towards heaven, and there was thick darkness in all the land of Egypt 3 days. They did not see one another, nor did anyone rise from his place for 3 days. But all the children of Israel had light in their dwellings. Then Pharaoh called to Moses and said, go serve the Lord. Only let your flocks and your herds be kept back. Let your little ones also go with you. But Moses said, you must also give us sacrifices and burnt offerings, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. Our livestock also shall go with us. Not a hoof shall be left behind. For we must take some of them to serve the Lord our God, and even we do not know with what we must serve the Lord until we arrive there.
Okay, awesome. An interesting thing is how this play comes right before the Passover. And it's very interesting that God chooses darkness. Yeah, he chooses darkness. Almost as if to say, this is your last straw. This is your final one, where I have left you to choose your darkness. I've left you to choose to stay away from me. I've left you to choose blindness. Yeah? It's almost like it's a very, very sharp warning. It's like, watch what's about to happen. Be careful, because take this warning very seriously. Because if I reach a point in my own spiritual life where I have become spiritually blind and unable to even see my own sin, know that I'm in a very, very bad place. Know that I'm in a dangerous place. Because a person who knows their sin even if they might not do their best in stopping, at least knows they're sinful. But the person who is sinful and does not see they're sinful is in a very dangerous place. Because that is when God is unable to work, right? God cannot work if you are not recognizing something wrong and you need to fix it and doing anything about it. There's always this verse in the New Testament when it says, to blaspheme against the Holy Spirit is an unforgivable sin. Why is it an unforgivable sin? Does anyone know the explanation? No. I know people know the explanation, just people don't want to talk. So yeah, go for this. Perfect. Right, awesome. There's no forgiveness if I'm not willing to ask for forgiveness. It's pretty much it. Yeah? If I am not willing to repent, there is no forgiveness that can be made. God cannot come to you and say, I forgive you, if you do not tell him I've done this wrong. Yeah? And interesting to know, there's almost a finality for this plague, because for the Egyptians, they worshipped a god called Ra. And Ra to them was the creator god. It was like the god among gods. So it's almost like God turns to him and says, even your God that you think is the big boss, he's gone. 3 days, he's not there. Yeah? Almost to turn it to him is like, this is the last straw. I have taken away the thing that you think is most powerful, and I've shown you I can do it. Be careful what is to come. Yeah? An interesting thing this reminded me of, a story reminded me of, is a story, it's a very weird one, it's a very interesting one, and it always tripped me out when I read it. It's about Saint Macarius and a demon. Yeah? So Saint Macarius, not a demon, like a dead skull. Yeah, so Saint Macarius is in the desert one day, just walking around like casually, I don't know what these monks do, but casually walking through a desert, and he sees a skull of a person who passed away. Or maybe he was sleeping on it, I can't remember the exact detail. But the skull talks to him, starts talking to him. And Saint Macarius asks, where are you? He's like, are you in heaven, are you in hell? He's like, I'm in hell. And he asks him, what's it like over there? So the description he gets of hell is this. So imagine you were stuck in position where you could only look forward. And there are people next to you, but you can't see them. You can't see them. And there's a burning heat on your back, but you can't see anything. You're just stuck in this one position. You can just feel this heat, and you can't see a single person. So St. Macarius asks, okay, what happens when we pray for you? He says, when you pray for us, for an instant, we get to see the face of the person next to us. It's almost as if that one instant of looking at someone else gives them, finally I see someone, and khalas is gone, it's taken from them. Why it reminded me of this is this idea of darkness, because there's a very specific detail where he says they couldn't even see their brother, right? Pharaoh had chosen his own hell. Yeah? Pharaoh had chosen his own hell. He put himself in such a state where he couldn't see his own brother. He was in the state that this dead person had told St. Macarius. He was in that state. And we can, on earth, do this to ourselves. Another story that came to mind, has anyone read The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis? Yeah? No, not? Okay. There's an interesting part when he comes to talk about heaven and hell, and where he describes the two. And it's very interesting the way he describes hell. When he comes to describe hell, he talks about it in terms of like an area where it's like there's an infinite distance. Like the place is so large, like huge. And he's saying, as you go out, people are further and further away from each other. So say at the beginning, people are like 10 meters away from each other. And then the people who are worse than that, another 50 meters out from that. And so on and so on and so on. And then people like Hitler, for example, are like hundreds of kilometers, thousands of kilometers away from everyone else, or just by themselves. It's almost to say, if I separate myself from people, if I lose the sense of unity I have with people in the church, I've created my own hell. And it's very strange, it's very interesting, because you always think of like the monks, for example, they choose to go away from people to find God. And we always talk about this idea that in fact, they are more united to the people in the world than we are. Why is that? In my brother, in my sister, I see the face of God, right? Because we talk about this idea, or not the idea, the fact that God created us in his image and likeness. So when I look into the face of my brother and sister, who do I look into the face of? God, right? And every single one of these people, God is found there. So if I choose to separate myself from these people, if I'm unable to see them, unable to commune with them, in a sense, I lose the interaction, the physical interaction on earth that I have with God. Because it is through my brother and sister that I can physically interact with God, which sounds strange, it's a very weird idea. But it is true. If I see in every single one of you God, then I'm interacting with God when I have a conversation with you, when I do anything, really. Yeah? Which is not to say that this is exactly what hell is, by the way. The story is we sometimes even question where it came from. But just to show to you what this darkness would have felt like. Like 3 days without being able to see a person, Pharaoh might as well have been in hell. And he had created his own hell for himself. Okay, we read up to 26. Okay, can we read to the end, like the last bit, 27 to 29?
But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let them go. Then Pharaoh said to him, "Get away from me. Take heed to yourself, and see my face no more. For in the day you see my face, you shall die." So Moses said, "You have spoken well. I never see your face again."
Yeah. So, by the way, that last line is very, very interesting. Because you see in the next chapter, Moses and Aaron go to Pharaoh again and speak to him about the Passover. Right? So that little detail, like, it's sort of in my head. I don't know if it's correct. I don't look at a church father for this verse. But it connects to the idea of that darkness, that the second I have spiritually blinded myself, I cannot even see the other person. I cannot see God in the other person. So Moses and Aaron, even when they went, it was almost as if they weren't there to Pharaoh because he was so blind. He could not see God. So he could not see the men of God, in a sense. Like, this is my reflection on it. And again, we see Pharaoh hardens his heart. And this time, he's still trying to argue, by the way. At this point, he's argued to the extent, okay, look, everyone can go, but leave the livestock. Yeah, he keeps trying to it's like he hasn't learned his lesson at this point. But we sort of do the same thing. Like, there is a cost sometimes, even if we want to accept it or not, there is a cost to following God. There's in some sense which I have to give up on things I want to hold dear. Like, we always talk about this idea, there's this one sin we love, and we know what the sin is. Yeah, we know exactly what that sin is. But sometimes we cannot bear ourselves to let go of it. Just like, let me do it one more time. Yeah, if I do this sin a few more times, maybe I'll get over it. And then I get over it for a bit, like, no, I need that sin again. Yeah? We get stuck in this loop. Another story this reminded me of in the New Testament is the young ruler who goes to Christ and asks, "What should I do to be perfect?" And he tells them, "Follow the commandments, yada, yada, yada." And then the young ruler goes and says, I've followed these from my youth. And it says Jesus loved him. Jesus loved him. It's like, one thing you are lacking. Go and sell what you have and give to the poor. And he's like, his face dropped. It was as if that was that one thing he had to have. That one thing he had to have, and he couldn't let go of it for the sake of Christ. And he walks away, which is crazy. Like, this guy who's following God from when he was young, was following the commandments, walks away at the last hurdle. Walks away because there's one thing he couldn't let go of, because he was rich. He couldn't let go of his money. And Christ is sad because of it. So we read this. Don't think it is God just is angry with Pharaoh, he's done with him. It is God being sad for Pharaoh. God is sad for Pharaoh. The Passover is going to come. The firstborn will die. But God does not do this in joy. God does it in sadness. He's sad that his son, because Pharaoh was his son, was his child, like we ought, that he wouldn't turn back. That he still tried to hold on to his stubbornness, to hold on to, I want my way. I want my way. I want the Egyptians still here. They need to serve me. I want to build this structure. I want to build this structure. I need these guys here, or I won't be able to build a structure. They need to stay here. Yeah? This thing he couldn't let go of. So each of us, let's count the cost of what we must give up. So we have to follow God. And it's not easy. The reason we go back to it is because it's not easy to let go of it. But if I let go of it, it is a great peace, a great joy. Yeah? And again, we'll go back to the story of the monk I was talking about, the alcoholic monk. You won't necessarily give it all up at once, but it's the idea about struggling to give it up, struggling to turn to God. Yeah? That's pretty much all I had. Were there any questions or anything? Yes.
Earlier you were saying something about you have to, when you're at your lowest point, God's there. So isn't it just better to stay at your lowest point because God's always there?
I've heard that one before. So when I say God's at my lowest point, one way to, because when I start thinking about it like that, it's assuming that I stay at my lowest point in order to see God, so I keep doing the thing that leaves me on lowest point. But remember how I said you have to be honest about wanting to change? If I'm staying at my lowest point, I'm not being honest about wanting to change, right? Like if I just stay in my lowest point and say, yeah, God's here, I'm going to stay here, God won't stay there with you, right? When I say he's with you at your lowest point, it's because he wants to pick you back up. And if you refuse to be picked back up and you want to stay there, you won't be picked back up. Yeah? So don't stay at lowest point to get God, because he will just walk away. Yeah? Did that answer it? Hopefully. Yeah, awesome. Any more questions or comments? Or heresies I said that need to be fixed? No? Okay. Glory be to God for a moment.